No,
Did
we
you
don't.
come out in 1940?
No, we came out in, 1849.
Ah,
Princess
okay.
Louise.
1849.
Yeah.
You've been here for a long minute.
Yeah. It's my grandpa's grandpa, I think that came.
Where
I should know this stuff because I wrote a book about it.
Yeah, I saw you've written a fair few books.
I have. I've written 10.
10
It was
books.
my 10th, yeah. The most recent one.
Why'd you get into writing books?
Well, I've always been interested in writing. So my mum was a teacher librarian. I don't know how far back you want to go. Always been a reader. So I've always written. And then, but then went into science, did my thesis, and then, became a science writer. And then I've just transitioned into a more general writer. So
yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
So you're listening to Watch Your Voyage. We have Kristin Weidenbach, and Kristin has also been introduced by Ian, so shout outs to Ian. And you're an immunologist, you are a author, you are a public speaker. You do a lot of things, don't you? You've been busy.
Yeah, I like to move around, I guess, and I haven't stuck with one thing. I've had quite a lot of different changes throughout my career.
I feel like that's a good way to do life. Like if you just take a macro approach to life, like
maybe it's a fear of commitment.
Maybe, but unless you're like a full like athlete or like, I don't know, like a musician that's like full honed their craft completely. It's like, why wouldn't you want to try a bunch of things? It's like,
yeah, I mean, you hear about people who knew from the age of 4 or something what they wanted to do, but I've taken quite a lot of different paths, but they've all sort of logically led one from the other.
So how did the immunology come about?
Well, I was actually interested in forensic science, and this was back before CSI and all those kind of TV shows. So I actually did all art subjects at high school: French, English, history, and I had biology. That was my only science subject. And then I decided I wanted to do a science degree and specialise in forensic science. So I guess that was a bit of a left turn. But did the science degree and specialised in molecular biology, molecular immunology. So sort of studying DNA, fingerprints and that sort of thing back in the early days before it was really such a common thing now.
And was that working? Did you start working with like police and forensics as a part of that role?
I did my honours degree with the Forensic Science Centre and also and with my PhD as well with the Red Cross, the blood centre, because DNA fingerprinting is sort of used for forensic science, suspect identification, but also paternity testing, and then also matching up people for transplantation. So they're the sort of 3 areas where you need to have
organs and
matching. Stuff. Yeah. So I did my PhD with the renal transplant unit at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital.
Yeah. Okay. So have you done any surgery?
No. So always only in the lab. I mean, I've been into operating theatres in various different capacities over my career. At Stanford Medical Center in California, I was in charge of the media, part of the media team. So I've been in operating theatres sort of making sure that the media don't, drape their cords or drop their microphone, in the operating zone, sort of thing.
In somebody?
Yeah, exactly right. So I remember my first operation I watched, I think, was a heart transplant on a 3-month-old baby.
Wow.
So that was pretty fascinating. And
Did
then
the baby live?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a bonus.
Yeah, and a heart-lung transplant on somebody. So then the operating room is just full of people because you've got a whole team of people for the patient and for the heart. And they took the heart-lung out of the patient and put I can't remember how it all went now. But yeah, there's a lot of people in there all looking after different organs and the patient. So. And then you've got a media team in there as well. So
in the same room, is it like what you see in the movies and they have like the glass screens and you're like looking down on it?
No, we're actually in the room. So that's where you're sort of going, make sure nobody touches anything. Everybody's actually in the operating theatre.
Wild.
Yeah.
Just because it's a baby?
No, this was a different patient. Yeah, this was a different patient.
Yeah, cool. All right, so just let's go back to the start because I feel like the immunology and going out there is a big shift after you've been doing some stuff. So where did it all kind of begin?
So I did my science degree and
so the science degree was out of uni or out of school?
Out of school I was even doing I trained as a beauty therapist and worked in a beauty salon for a while. I was working at the casino. So when the casino first opened, back in whatever year, in the 80s that was.
So you're like, I'm just going to count some cards and then switch it up.
Yeah. I was a roulette dealer. So yeah, did that. That was actually a pretty good part-time job. It paid well, but man, for 1 year I was enrolled full-time at uni, and then I did some training up at the casino in Alice Springs. That's when I got sort of first started in it. Came down to Adelaide and said, tried to get a job, and they said, yep, they give you a test to make sure you can deal everything. And they said, yeah, we'll offer you a job, but we've only got full-time jobs at the moment because they just opened. So I had a full-time university load and a full-time job from 8 at night till 4:30 in the morning.
Oh, Lord.
So that was, I was literally falling asleep everywhere and anywhere for that sort of, and I dropped subjects as the year went on. It was my second year at uni. So that wasn't very successful.
And was this while doing the science degree?
Yeah. So I was doing my science degree then.
Oh my Lord, that's so like heady. It's not even just something intuitive.
You look back and you kind of go, well, how did I survive that? But got through and finished my science degree, did honours, worked at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital for a while, and then did my PhD, and then went over to Stanford University in California to do my postdoc. Yeah,
okay. What was it like in California? What decade were you in Cali for?
So I went over there in 95.
Yeah,
I was there from 95 to 2002, so 7 years, almost exactly.
The glory days.
Yeah, it was.
It
was great. It was a big adventure. When I remember, I'd not been to the States before. I didn't know anyone in there, so I got there at the airport and there's someone standing there with the sign with your name on it. But I remember, so it was June, and so that's summer in the States, obviously. And on the way back from the airport, the guy said, we just need to drop into the lab because he had to do something or other. So we went to the campus at Stanford University, and there's bottle brush trees and gum trees and the sprinklers going, it just sounded, just like home. So it's in Northern California, a lot like Australia. So that was nice, at least it felt familiar.
Yeah, beauty. And so you were in were you in a university then?
Yeah, I was at Stanford University.
Okay, so what was that like? Was it like sorority and stuff like that as well at that level?
It is. It's like one of the Ivy League universities.
Did you join a sorority?
West Coast. No, so that's all for the undergraduates. So we're postdocs are all post.
Too cool for that at the stage. Yeah, we're like we're too smart for that.
No,
we know the traps.
We're too poor for that. Like we don't have our parents funding us to be there. Postdocs there from all over the world. I was living in a share house with there was 9 of us in a share house. So it was this big old rambling, falling down house. But yeah, people sort of imagine you're going to America to make your fortune and you're going to be, rolling in cash. And no, far from it. You're all of us were on, very small scholarship money or whatever, and you're expected to work, non-stop. I'd been there for a year and a half. So I got there in June, and it was coming up, and I decided I'd go home for Christmas. So I hadn't seen anyone for that time. And I remember going in to say to my professor, I'm just, letting you know I'm going home for Christmas for 3 weeks, so I'll be away. And he just looked at me and he said, well, I understand you want to go home. I don't know why you have to go for 3 weeks. He thought that was excessive time to be away from the lab. So that was the sort of environment it was, very high pressure. We had Nobel Prize winners in our department, so you were, really expected to, put your science above everything else.
Yeah, okay. It's like the duty of the exploration of what you're working on.
Yeah, and I guess that's why I ended up leaving science. I just didn't feel that I had the passion to devote my whole life to it. I wanted to travel, I wanted to play sport, I wanted to have a family, I suppose, or, not that I'd thought that far ahead, but my professor, his partner was a professor at UCSF, and, you were expected to just devote your whole life to science, and I didn't have the passion to do that. So I could have been, I was, successful at what I was doing, but I just didn't feel that I wanted to devote my whole life to it. So.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely looks like you still made some tracks. You have some research papers out that I saw on your website. Yeah. Could you take me through like what some of those research papers are and what they're about, or like the most interesting ones to you?
Yeah, I have to dredge that up from my memory. So as I said, I was studying The system of genes, HLA genes they're called, but they're the system of genes that create differences among individuals. So that's the sort of the gene system that people study. As I said, in forensic science, they're important. So it creates the DNA fingerprint that you might hear people sort of talk about, this sort of ladder-like system.
Treat me like I know nothing, because science is not my topic.
When you see CSI or something and they're looking at this, it looks like an X-ray film, and it'll have like a ladder of little dark lines.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
That's the DNA fingerprint, basically.
Yeah, okay.
So I'm not going to explain how they get to that, but then they'll look at two different sort of ladders and go, oh, they match, so that means it must be the same person.
And does that DNA fingerprint like tell you everything from like the color of their hair and all that kind of thing?
Basically, what they're only looking at is, do the lines match, and if they match in all these ways, so that's why they call it a fingerprint, because if it matches, they say, well, it must be the same person. So that's why.
Does anybody ever have the same?
Well, it's infinitesimally small, so that's why they use that system for matching people or excluding people in a crime scene scenario. Same thing with transplantation. You need to match up two people to get a good match so that the organ's not going to be rejected. And again, with paternity testing, if you're trying to see if...
Who's the dad?
Yeah, they need to match. So that whole system of genes is useful in those three scenarios. So that's the system that I was studying, because I was in the transplant immunology lab. When I went over to the States, so you can sort of look at how those genes differ between individuals, between racial groups, basically, and then in California at Stanford, I was looking at how that system of genes had evolved over time. So looking at non-human primates.
And what is the difference like?
Well, very small. I think it's like 98% or something we share about 98% of our DNA with chimpanzees. So, but
what do you think is the missing link
Oh.
between like what's your hot take on it? Like, obviously you probably thought about it being
No, I'm not, honestly, really. I mean, I feel like I've left that such a long time ago, even to remember the stuff that I was kind of doing. It feels like, it's almost talking about someone else's life. So I'm not, the research has moved on, and that's the thing with science. If you don't keep up with it, things change. You've got to keep up with the literature, the body of work that scientists all over the world are working on all the time. So it's really important to stay abreast of developments and stuff. So I feel like I'm too outdated to even offer an opinion of that.
No, fair enough. I've heard a few cool theories though. Have you heard of stoned ape theory?
No.
So the idea is that because across the world there's a bunch of like cultures and civilizations that have had roots in psychedelics and done it in a shamanic style, whether it be ayahuasca or mushrooms or whatnot, that the idea is that as monkeys, they just found out about these things and they started tripping out. And because they had so much of it as food, it neurologically changed the pathways in their brain and caused them to have more sentient capabilities over like thousands or hundreds of thousands of years, which is pretty wild.
That's pretty crazy. That's about all I can conclude from that.
Yeah, fair. All right. So you did a bunch of research papers on DNA fingerprinting. Was there anything else that you did research papers on?
No, it was sort of it was all to do with that system of genes. So how it had evolved in the great apes, gorillas, orangutans, and sort of that's looking at the evolution of these sort of genes that are important in the immune system.
Okay, so we're definitely from gorillas and apes and chimpanzees.
Well, the non-human primates.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. So not monkeys, but orangutan, gorillas. Can't think of the third one, but yeah. So then I did that for about 2.5 years, my postdoc, and then decided that's not what I wanted to do after all. So after about 10 years of study, basically, bachelor degree of science, PhD, postdoc, and then thought, actually.
What was that like? Like switching up like that after 10 years of, getting ready for this big career and then.
Yeah, well, I suppose at some point I realised I wasn't happy doing that. I didn't want to stay in the lab. I mean, I could have come back to Australia and got a job in a lab here and probably, been, fine at it. But I just decided, as I said, that I just didn't have the fire in my belly for that. So actually I went to a conference and heard a woman speaking. She was a science writer at the Sacramento Bee, which is Sacramento's the capital of California. And so that was her job. She was a science journalist, basically. So going to universities and hospitals and, and finding about all the new advances and the most exciting research that was going on, and then writing it up for the general readership. And I thought, well, that's a cool job, and to get into that, you need to either come in through the journalism stream or through the science sort of background. So that's, I thought, well, I'm going to try and do that. That sounds very cool. Rather than spending all those years doing, one thing, I'd like to talk about, all
of it.
Yeah, all of it, exactly. As they say with journalists, I think their knowledge is a mile wide and 1 inch deep, whereas what I'd been doing was 1 inch deep a mile deep and 1 inch wide. So I sort of flipped it on its head and decided that's what I wanted to do. So yeah, and then I had to make it happen. Basically, I did a.
How'd you go about making that happen?
Yeah, so I did get offered a scholarship sort of position, but not being an American citizen, I couldn't take that. But I did do an internship sort of thing at Harvard Medical School, so I was over there for a few months, and then got offered a full-time position back at Stanford. So I ended up back at Stanford Medical Center as a science writer rather than a scientist.
Yeah, cool. And was it like, how'd you go about doing that kind of job? Did you just create relationships with those that were doing the research and kind of pop in here and there, or were they like, oh, we found something, and then come to you? Or
well, it sort of goes both ways. Because I'd been at Stanford as well, I had a lot of connections, so I could sort of go, well, what do you, what's the new thing happening in your lab? Sometimes people, would come to you and tell you things, but sometimes they'd be the more boring things like, oh, we just had a promotion from associate professor to professor or anything.
Yeah, nobody wants to
know
it's
important for you, but yeah, it's not really something that people are going to pick up the newspaper and read. But yeah, so it was a matter of sort of just trying to, like any journalist, I guess, keeping your ear to the ground and trying to work out, what's new and what things are happening. Papers are being accepted in, important journals. I did, I remember one time there was flyers being posted up around the medical school and the university. They wanted people for a clinical trial, and they were looking at the bacteria that causes diarrhea, because that causes a lot of deaths in babies in, underdeveloped areas of the world. So were trying to create a vaccine by causing genetic changes in the bacteria and then being able to give it to people and sort of protect them from the effects of this diarrhea bacteria. So they wanted volunteers.
And how did that start?
I don't know how they started the study, but they needed people who were willing to take the sample of the bacteria, the genetically modified bacteria, to see if it was successful in not causing diarrhea. And so they were paying people, it was like $300, I think, to each student anyone who volunteered, and students were interested because it was paying. So I said, we should do the story on this, because the students are all, signing up because they're getting $300, which was quite a good payment back in the mid-90s. And the editor of our newspaper and magazine said, that's a great idea, but you should sign up and you should go through the trial and do the trial, do it as a first-person thing. And I was like, yeah, that's not exactly what I had in mind. Yeah, I did. It was all very, carefully, organised. You had to check into the clinical trials unit, so you're under medical supervision for I think it was about 3 days. So basically they come in and they give you a solution. It's about 20 mils that you have to drink, and you don't know.
Of feces? No,
it's like it's a sterile or saline solution that's got the bacteria in it.
Yeah, okay.
So you might get a dose of the bacteria that hasn't been altered, in which case you're pretty much going to get severe diarrhea. Blind. Yeah. Or if you get the one that's been, they had various stages of ones that had been altered, and if you got the one that had been, with the most alterations, that's the one they're thinking is going to be what they'll be able to give to people for a vaccine, but they have to prove that you can drink it and not get diarrhea.
And why do people get diarrhea? Why do these babies in third world countries get the diarrhea? Is it because of the water? Is it because
it's it's rotavirus or different bacteria, Shigella and E. coli and various bugs basically in the water.
Yeah, okay. And why do babies get it? Because they wouldn't be drinking, or is it just kids, like small kids?
Oh, yeah, small kids. Yeah, and they haven't got a very robust immune system. So that's why younger children are more vulnerable, because they haven't got any of their own natural immunity. But yeah, young kids, I mean, anybody, can get it. So
yeah, okay. Fair. And how was the test for you?
yeah, so I got the, I can't remember, but the highest dose of the modified bacteria. So yeah, it affected me for sure. But if it had been unmodified bacteria, would have been really, really, really sick. But yeah, so
did the bacteria, the modified bacteria, end up working?
Yeah, it still caused a result. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So you had to put this catcher thing, they called it a hat, in the toilet. So if you use the toilet, then you couldn't flush it. You had to call, ring the bell, call the nurse or researcher or whatever, and they'd come in and examine everything. And so it was not for the faint-hearted, but I won an award for the story that I wrote about it.
Really?
Yeah, from the Council of Medical and Scientific Education. So
congratulations.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, I don't know if it was for the good writing or just the bravery of signing up for it.
Fair enough. And was there any other stories that you did that broke news about these kind of cool?
Well, I do remember that the human genome was sequenced at the time I was at Stanford. So Stanford researchers contributed part. I mean, that was a huge international effort. But I remember writing a story about it when it happened at the time, because Stanford researchers were part of it. So I guess that was a pretty
that's
moment.
Huge.
Yeah.
And for those that don't really know about science and what that discovery was, could you just take us through
Well, it's just basically they'd solved all the genetic code basically for a human being. So all our genes have DNA, and the code is all the little letters. It's basically like our alphabet's got 26 letters, and it makes up all the words of our English language. The genetic code has 4 letters, A, T, G, C, and that makes the entire code for a human being or a gorilla or an ant or whatever. Every living organism has DNA. So it was the first time that they'd basically been able to say, we have worked out every single letter of the human genome. So from there, then they can sort of begin to do other research and trying to look at, well, what happens when things go wrong? What letters change in that alphabet?
Yeah, cool. And then is that what led to being able to do gene splicing and whatnot? Because we obviously knew that.
Yeah, a lot of that technology was already, in existence.
Oh, even before we knew the genome.
Yeah. I mean, they're techniques that allowed them to be able to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, cool. All right. So then from being this journalist, you did that just in America, or you moved that back to Australia?
Yeah, no, I did that in America, and I really loved that job. It was great. I loved it. But I ended up leaving, and that was because I got involved with the project that became my first book, Mailman of the Birdsville Track. So while I was living over in America, my dad back here in Australia was working on the Leyland Badger, the truck that Tom Cruise used to drive up and down the Birdsville Track delivering the mail. So Dad would write letters to me about this old truck and this old man who I'd not met and didn't know anything about. But I decided, he spent 4 years with a small group of volunteers restoring that truck, and then they were going to have a reenactment run down the Birdsville Track. And so I thought I'll come back and join in that, because it was, a big thing that Dad had been working on and it sounded like fun. So I came back, and that's when I, met Tom and saw the reaction that people had to him. And my dad had been keeping a logbook for the time that he'd been working on the truck, and there'd been there was a film called The Back of Beyond, which is why a lot of people knew about the Badger and Tom. And then there were a lot of people that wrote letters to Tom on this reenactment run. They carried, you could write a letter and get it, have a self-addressed stamped envelope, and it would come back to you after being on the Badger's last run. So there was lots of stories in there about Tom and how people would remember seeing the film and all that kind of thing. So I thought, I'll write all those letters up, because my dad would like, to have a copy of those. And I'll write all the logbooks up, because Tom would like a copy of those, and the people that worked on the truck. And the more I sort of thought about it, I thought, it'd be nice to put the whole story together, and why is this truck important and that sort of thing. And then I thought, well, I guess I could write a book, So I said to Tom, I'm thinking, about writing a book. Would that be okay with you? And he said, yeah, sure. So that's how it sort of became my first book. I spent about 3 months over here, back in Adelaide, working. I'd go over to Tom's house once a week and interview him. Basically, that was me just sitting there with my tape recorder, and Tom would just spin out his yarns.
And what did he say? What was the journey?
Well, I mean, Tom, if anyone who remembers Tom actually was the very first person that featured on Australian Story when that started on the ABC many years ago. And I think probably the reason that nobody had written his story before is because he's not an easy person to interview. He speaks in a very sort of distinctive style, but his stories just all flow one to the other. So, he'd be sort of, you'd say, tell me, about Monty Scobie. Oh, Monty, he'd say, yeah, so Monty, yeah, he was at Royal Annie, and I remember him from when he used to be, he used to talk a lot to George Johnson. So he was up at Birdsville, and then when I saw George Johnson, he was talking to Frank Murray, and then he'd just go on and on and on, and you'd get half of all these stories, yeah. So I'd sort of get home at the end of the day, and I was typing everything up, and then I'd sort of have to come back next week and go, so Frank Murray, or whatever, and, I just had all these bits of stories, but finally after, several days, you'd kind of get the end of the first story and manage to sort of get them all, back in order. And
sounds like the kind of bloke that after a few beers would catch you for a good amount of time.
Yeah, it was no trouble to him to just sit there, and that's what he liked to do, to talk. Because I remember I'd usually get around there about 10 o'clock, 9:30. Get some stuff out and whatever, and we'd have a cup of tea. Velma would make us some morning tea, and then Tom would start talking, and then we'd, carry on. We'd have lunch, and then we'd carry on, and then afternoon tea, and then about 4 o'clock I'd say, okay, so Tom, I'm going to get going now, and I'd be packing my stuff up, and Tom, I just wanted to tell you about Henry Butler, and he'd carry on with another story, and I'd be standing there with my bag and everything, on my shoulder, and he'd just keep on talking, and then eventually Velma would say, Tom, she has to go. So at least I didn't feel that I was, an imposition. It was nice for him. That's what he likes to do, talk, and had an audience. And people would pop in and out, to see Tom. Yeah, it was really special actually to spend all that time with him.
And what was the reception like for the book?
The book, it's sold over 120,000 copies now. Wow. So yeah, I'm not sure what the recent, what the actual figures are, but it basically, they were going to print, I think 7,000, or they were going to print 7, I think. And then they upped it to 12 before it came out, and then it was sold out sort of within the first week. And because I'd not written a book before, I just didn't really appreciate how unusual that is. A lot of books in Australia sell, if it's a bestseller, maybe 5,000 copies.
Wow, and you just smashed that out of the park.
So
why did that happen? Like, how did that come to be?
Why it sold? I mean, I think the reason it's been so successful is, a lot of it's Tom's story. People love Tom. They, have such admiration for him, and nobody had told the story before. I just wanted to write it up. I just wanted to write the story. So I didn't go the traditional route of sort of approaching a whole lot of publishers and agents and collecting rejection letters. I was working on this book. I was going to write it no matter what. And then actually the publisher contacted me and said, I heard you're writing a book about Tom Cruise. I mean, I was back in America by then, back at my job. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, we're interested. So I talked to one other publisher, just sort of out of courtesy, I guess, a local publisher. And it came out with, well, it was hotter at the time than our Hachette. So yeah, very, fortunate path to my first book. Yeah.
And then tell me, what was it like? What's it like being as you did that first book and being like, whoa, you like burst on the book scene. You're this big book writer now. Like, what was it like? Did you have people come up to you and be like, oh my God, you're this book writer and stuff?
Well,
you're like a book celebrity? I
suppose, well, the first thing I learned is that you write a book and then everybody says, so what's your next book? And you're going to go, oh, hang on, I didn't I didn't really plan to write this book, and I've written a book, and now everyone's like, what's your next one? And I hadn't really thought about it. So I just thought it was a little ironic because lots of people say, one day I'm going to write a book. I've got a book in me, and I had not been one of those people. It had occurred the other way for me. The story had found me, and I thought I need to write this up. So that's, I suppose, one thing I've discovered over the years, now having written 10 books, that what I almost would like to call myself rather than a writer is a storyteller. You know, it's telling the story. You know, it's that's the goal for me, trying to make it into an interesting story.
So what was the follow up?
So the follow up was Rockstar, the story of Reg Sprigg. So that was, I've had a career writing.
This is where Arkaroola comes into
This
it.
is where Arkaroola comes into it. Met Ian Plimer. I've had a career pretty much writing about Outback men, although my last book was the memoir of a woman, although she also from, a remote part of Australia, Outback Australia, up at Cygnet Bay near Broome.
You had to book 10 year line. I might need to switch it up.
Yeah, well, yeah. No,
Tell me, how did you get involved in writing Reg's story?
So, I was back in the States by then. The Mailman had come out. And, I guess just that by then, I was coming to the point I wanted to come home. Much as I loved my job at Stanford and I had, really beautiful friends and, good life over there, I wanted to be back in Australia. And it wasn't really even missing the people as much as missing the country. I mean, I'm not I didn't grow up in the country. I grew up in Adelaide. But I just felt like I wanted to be, somewhere in touch with the country. I was sort of thinking, Ayers Rock or, I don't know. I just wanted to be somewhere really Australian. And so 2002 was the year of the Outback. And so they were having this celebration at Arkaroola, and my mum and dad were going, and they were going to celebrate these legends of Outback transport it was, and Tom Cruise was going. They were going to take the Badger up there, and he was going to be at Arkaroola. Griselda was going to be featured because she's the first sort of European woman who drove across the Simpson Desert, and a few other people, Warren Beneath, and so they were going to have this celebration. So I thought, you know what, I'll go to that. It's really hard when you've lived overseas for, a certain amount of time to kind of pick a day and go, that's the day I'm coming home. So I thought I'll time my return to be able to join in and do that because the Badger will be there. Actually, the book hadn't come out at that point.
What's this kind of car? I don't understand what this car looks like.
It's a truck, and it's a truck that was built by Leyland.
What's Leyland?
Leyland's the name of a brand of a truck like Toyota.
Yeah, okay.
And so they were British, big cumbersome lumbering trucks, no four-wheel drive,
But they had the big curved headlights and stuff like that?
that kind of thing, yeah.
Okay.
So they were not built to be driving over sandhills and rutted, corrugated tracks that Tom was driving on to go up to Birdsville. So, it was a mighty effort to get this thing up there every 2 weeks, and back. And you see in the film, you see him going around in circles, getting enough speed to be able to go shoot up the top of this sandhill. So that's why people, loved him. But Leyland, so let's say Leyland is the maker of the truck, and they had all their different models were called after animals. So they had a hippo and a beaver and a badger. And so it was the badger that Tom, so that wasn't the nickname that he came up with. That's the model of the truck. In the same way, we've got Toyota RAV4 and Yaris and whatever.
I like those old school names way better.
Yeah.
Imagine that. I'm driving my hippo.
Yeah, the hippo, the beaver, the badger. There were others, but I can't think of others at the moment.
Have a sports car called the Leopard.
Yeah.
It's not good for long distance.
No. Yeah, so can't remember how we came to that, but
So you were going specifically for the event that Tom Cruise was going to.
Yeah, so he was going to be up there, and so I thought, well, I'll come back for that and join in for that. So the book hadn't come out at that point. I just thought it'd be maybe good to more research or, just to take part in it. So that was the impetus for coming back home in 2002.
And then, how did this second book develop? Was it from that?
Yeah, so that's right. So I came back, and of course, I had to then find a job and do all that kind of thing. And but yeah, having spent a few days at Arkaroola, and I just fell in love with the place. As I said, I was keen to go somewhere very Australian, and I thought, well, this will do, So they didn't have much call for research scientists or lab workers at Arkaroola, but I got a job there just, like a lot of people do, cleaning rooms, waitressing, and then working on the front desk, just doing the general stuff that happens up at Arkaroola.
Yeah, beauty. Let me just check. Is that camera working? It's just turned off. Do you want to just move this camera so then we're still filming? And then you fix that camera?
I feel like this is cutting in and out a little bit. Am I imagining that, or is that okay?
I think it just tries to do it as part of its automation
Okay,
between pauses. So then it like cuts in and out of, and also if you don't talk away from it a bit, it goes like,
Okay.
oh, you're
Well,
not
if you're
talking to this
happy
one.
with it, yeah, that's
Yeah,
fine.
no, it should be fine. Okay, so is that directioned? You're back at Arkaroola, you're working there, and then you were just like, oh, this place is really cool. This story of how it got built.
Yep. I mean,
so what is the story so for people that don't know?
Of Reg Sprigg, Rockstar?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Rockstar's the story of Reg Sprigg. So he was first person to drive across the Simpson Desert. Just checking which one I'm talking about now. Yeah, so first person to drive across the Simpson Desert. He basically discovered the what's now the Cooper Basin oil and gas fields. He was a geologist, so that's what was prompting all this sort of exploration. He discovered the deepest canyons under the sea. Just south of Vivone Bay on Kangaroo Island, there's a canyon under the floor of the sea that's as big as bigger than the Grand Canyon. So
wow, how deep?
5 kilometres deep and more than 8 kilometres long. Yeah, so that's called Sprigg Canyon.
5 kilometres deep.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's huge.
Yeah, so back, that was created, back 100,000 years ago or something, by the Murray River sort of carved that out when the water level was a lot lower than it is today. So he discovered that back in 1946 or 47. Basically at the same time that he discovered the Ediacaran fossils, the oldest animal fossils in the world.
And that's the bit that made Arkaroola or that region famous, right?
Yeah, well, they don't find those actual fossils at Arkaroola. They're the what they call the golden spike, which is the marker for each geological era, like the Jurassic era and the Permian and whatever. There's a golden spike somewhere in the world that says this is the rock that shows the age of this era. And the golden spike for the Ediacaran era is in Bratchina Gorge in the Flinders Ranges. So that's the only one, I think, in the southern hemisphere.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, so he discovered those fossils out near Lake Torrens, and had a lot of trouble getting people to believe him that he'd actually found these very primitive early animal fossils. People like his lecturer at Adelaide University, who was Douglas Mawson, completely, discredited him. Yeah, poo-pooed the idea. Just and so they came to him with 1 or 2 fossils, and Mawson just poured scorn all over it until he then went again and came back with 100 different fossils or something, and he was forced to believe him. And I think it was he was jealous. That's what the bottom line was.
I've heard that a lot, not necessarily in geology but archaeology, that there's a huge ego complex of those that are the establishment, essentially, of this is the history that we've found. And because they've published books and they're like, yeah, we're the ones that have found it, and they're very adamant about it, that it's like anytime someone comes to drastically change the narrative with obviously evidence, because evidence-based industry, that they're just ridiculed and just like cut down from the knees. And it's just, it goes against the whole, the naive passion of the whole thing, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, so Reg wasn't disproving anything that Mawson had said, but Mawson, they both knew that there was this gap in the fossil record. There must be, creatures that filled this era of time, and Mawson, desperately wanted to find them. And it was Reg, that found them. His student, this young, 20-something, year-old guy. So so that was like irksome for Mawson.
Yeah.
It
reminds me of this this story that I heard at do you know like that Freemasons hole or Freemasons or Knight Templar hole in, I think it's on the border of Scotland and England, and it's beautiful and it has I can't remember what it's called. Anyway, there's a story of these 2 columns, and one's a regular column, and then so it was the master and then the apprentice. And the master went away to go collect materials or whatever for a significant amount of time, and came back, and the apprentice made this column that was just so beautifully masoned. It had all these beautiful designs and features on it and all that. And the master got so jealous, he killed the apprentice.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Envy.
Yeah.
That's why one of the
7 deadly sins.
Yeah, exactly right. That's why. Yeah.
Gets us. We're emotional creatures, aren't we?
Yeah.
All right. So can you tell me more about this big old canyon? Because I feel like I've never heard about this, and I don't know
well,
why.
you got to read my book, and you'll see. So as I said, he discovered it. It was either 1946 or 47. One was the fossils, and one was the canyon. And he was. So then it was a Navy ship, I think, that was going around the coast, and they found the evidence of it. And then another ship went around a couple of years later and didn't find it, and so that sort of again discredited what he'd said. But they found out later that it had been going along like a different fathom line and had basically been too far out and had missed it. But Reg never gave up on it, and that was part of the reason why he built this boat, his own boat, Sayori.
How big's the boat?
Not sure the size of it, but he basically had this whole contraption on the back of it so that he could lower a diving chamber. So he wanted to do geophysical surveys of Gulf St Vincent. Again, looking for oil and gas as part of his
What's a geophysical survey?
So looking at the evidence of to see if there's any underground sort of deposits of oil and gas.
How do they do that?
Don't get me all technical. You should have asked Ian Plimer. They bounce symbols off, and if there's an anticline, which is a big sort of like bulge.
Okay. So it uses the signals. Yeah, okay, fair.
And they can look at that and decide if there's evidence to drill or not. But they were doing that. So basically, he built this diving chamber, which was an old disused boiler. So it had really thick sides to be able to withstand the pressure, but really narrow. You wouldn't have been able to do it if you were claustrophobic. It was really just enough for one person to get in there. They sealed it all up, had a little window, lowered it to the bottom. They'd take the guy inside, Jonas, would take readings.
Reg drag along. Or
no, it would just sit there. Yeah, they'd put it down. It would sit there while that was happening. Reg and some other Scoresby shepherds, another local person that some people may know, would go around and take samples of the substrate and make a survey of what plants and animals are there. So they did a really thorough, what's called a benthic survey of the Gulf, which was again valuable scientific information. But then they'd haul the chamber up, and then they'd go to the next spot and put it down again. So this chamber, once they finished using it, it was built at Woodville in Geosurvey's yard, sheds, whatever, which was Reg's company. When they finished using it, they somehow, I guess Reg didn't know what to do with it, took it up to Arkaroola. So for many years it was sitting at Arkaroola until one day a guy called by the name of Richard Harris, who turns out to be the cave diving anaesthetist that saved the boys in Thailand recently.
That guy.
Yeah, he was holidaying at Arkaroola, saw it, recognised what it was because he's a diver, and said, look, we should be, this thing has got a lot of history. We should, it's early days of scuba diving and that sort of thing. We should preserve it. So he led the effort to restore it, and it's now currently sitting on the foreshore at Glenelg. So there's a tram, and there's, I don't know, a couple of other sort of unusual historical, objects down there, one of which is this diving chamber that Reg Briggs' company made. And
I'm going to have to look out
for it next time I go. Yeah, we went to the installation and unveiling, which would have been now, I don't know, 10 years ago maybe. But yeah, that was all because of Dr. Harry.
So how did they actually find the actual the canyon then? As a part of that, because that sounds like they were.
That was like again echo. Oh, so echo sounders or whatever off this Navy vessel. But yeah, so now there's been a team, in recent years, a team of researchers from ANU have gone out there and confirmed it all, and they've got satellite imagery of the whole thing now. So yeah, that's so cool. Named Sprigg Canyon.
And does it have did we find new species of stuff in it?
No, I haven't heard anything. I mean, it's just a matter of at this point proving that it was there, that Reg found it. He didn't get to see that happen in his lifetime. He died in 1994, and this research or this confirmation from ANU happened in the 2000s, I think. But it's nice to know for the family, that all of his things that people might have poo-pooed him about have all proven to be right. You know, he was a, you know, an innovative thinker and somebody who put his money where his mouth was, you know, like didn't sort of say, oh, somebody should research this or somebody should, you know, protect the Northern Flinders Ranges. You know, he bought Akaroola and he protected that part of the Flinders Ranges from, you know, to keep the arid environment pristine for people to go up there and see it. And he built his own boat so he could go out there and, you know, see what was under the sea and that kind of thing. So,
yeah. Beauty.
Yeah.
And did you, in terms of the actual writing of this book, did you just sit down like you did with the last book and interview and record
it? To some extent, but of course Reg had already died, so I never got to meet Reg. So, but he was a prolific letter writer. So, and Akaroola had a whole store of, a whole building of archives of various things, including, you know, dockets for what they paid for a pound of sausages, you know, in 1973 or something, is just stuffed with.
I bet people want those prices right now.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, but maps and books and lots and lots of stuff. So I spent a lot of time going through all that paperwork. But yeah, he kept the letters that people wrote to him and often and copies of letters that he'd written. So you'd sort of see two sides of the correspondence. So he was good friends, for instance, with Sir Mark Oliphant, Douglas Mawson, you know. So there was a lot of material. And then I interviewed lots of people that he that knew him. Students that had been geology students at the same time as him, you know, people that had been on the, you know, Scoresby Shepherd I mentioned before. He's, prolific sort of marine researcher. So, yeah, anyone that I could find that had some contribution.
Yeah, cool. Speaking of Mawson and Antarctica, there has been some maps that have like resurfaced from the 15th century that actually have Antarctica on it. And they said in the letters of the person that made this map in the 15th century that these were based off previous source maps that map maker had found. So then the theory is now, well, how did that happen? There was some peoples that clearly went and explored Antarctica way before we know, and we don't have any record besides these like random maps. So it's pretty wild that we potentially explored that way before with like a lost civilization, if you will.
Yep. Yeah. Mine boggles.
There's just a lot. There's just a lot of things in history that don't add up yet, and we're like, it just makes us. It's like we're just still children as a species, very much so. And the future of us as a species is it's going to be like infinitesimally higher. Like even when we get like in space properly and start going between planets and all that, I feel like we're only just growing up then compared to what would be possible for a civilization.
We just got to learn to do better looking after our planet while we are here.
Yeah. Actually, what are your thoughts on that, on climate change and all that, since I've had the Akaroola boys here and they're not afraid to be controversial?
Ian Plimer's very convincing when he's standing on the mount at Akaroola and sharing his views. You're I am complete disciple. I'm like, yep. But then, I in the cold, harsh light of day, I feel that we are, messing things up, and I can't deny human, influence on climate change, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. I feel Ian was saying to me that for Australia in particular, the two biggest issues that we need to focus on as conservationists are plastics and feral animals.
I would not argue with that. No, definitely not.
Yeah. So then from this second book, did this also, like, how did that go? Did that go as well as the first book, and you had the same different publishers and whatnot? Or?
No, I had a different publisher, and I suppose my experience with the publishing industry, almost every book I've published has been with a different publisher, and I have self-published a couple, or one anyway. But I haven't found any loyalty amongst publishers. So that book, as I said, it's sold for phenomenal amount. But then when I wrote the second book, Rockstar, I offered it to the same publisher, and they were, well, Reg Sprigg, we don't really know who he is, and he's not known on the East Coast where the big publishers are. And my sort of argument was, well, even if only 10% of the people who bought my first book buy the second book, by then it was 80,000 copies or something. Well, then you've already got sales bigger than a lot of books published in Australia would be. Anyway, they didn't choose to publish it, so it was published by a small company here in Adelaide. But it's been successful. I remember some years later being at an event to do with Writers' Week, which here in Adelaide, and they often have gatherings of publishers, and I crossed paths with the managing director or something of Hachette, the company that had published Mailman, and something came up about Rockstar, my second book, and we must have been talking about how many copies Mailman had sold and how amazing that was, and then I said something about Rockstar, and I said, "Oh, how many copies has that sold?" And I said, "Oh, about 12,000 or something." He said, "Well, you should have offered it to us." And I said, "I did." And I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, I'm very happy with the way it's turned out. I've made, I've made new connections and things, but there is no doubt that if it had been taken by a bigger publisher, it would have sold more copies because they've just got the advertising and marketing, strength behind them.
Yeah, so, and like the distribution channels. Yeah. With all the big stores, because especially back in the 2000s.
Yeah, there were more bookshops.
Yeah, well, bookshops were the thing, right?
Yeah.
Amazon hadn't taken over.
No, that's right. Yeah, so no regrets in the end, but it was difficult at the time to sort of understand why, and I think it just came down to, well, we don't know who Reg Sprigg is, and weren't willing to take a punt on finding out.
Fair enough. And at this point in your career as an author, was it like, oh, I'm like a fully self-sustained author, and like that was your job now, or like you had to go get a job just so I was
doing sort of other things. I was doing some organising the archives for Arkaroola, but since then I really haven't. For about 14 years I was just working supporting myself as an author.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I went on then, I think the next book I did, so I only write non-fiction. I've never written any fiction, so I have, that would be beyond me trying to make up a story, I think, and characters. I like to tell the stories of the people, I think that there's a lot of amazing stories out there, so my job is to make them, to bring them out.
What's the third story?
So the third one, I think, that's the sequence. Anyway, I was asked to write the history of Santos, the oil and gas company. So I've written several commissioned books. So that's where instead of you writing a book and then trying to sell it to a publisher who then tries to sell it to the general public, this is the basically where you're hired by somebody, an organisation or a company or whatever it might be, to write their story. And so you're basically taken on as a contractor or however you make the arrangement, but you're basically paid to write their book. And then they can do whatever they want. They might just give it all away, So you're not relying on the sales of the book to be paid. You're paid, and then they can sell the book, or they can,
fair. And what was it like writing that story? It
was good. Yeah.
How'd you go about doing it?
Good. Oh well, same as as all my books. I mean, it takes me about 2 years normally to write a book, and about the first year or more is research, and then the second 9 months, say, is the writing. So the first part is always the research, and that's, going through a lot of usually dusty old papers, opening boxes that haven't been opened for years, reading annual, in the case of companies, reading, it was the 60th anniversary for Santos. They wanted the book for that. So 60 years of annual reports, financial board minutes, staff, magazines, just pretty much, newspaper clippings, anything you can really get your hand on, going through everything until you sort of feel that you've either reached the end or you get to the point where you're sort of just seeing the same thing sort of
How'd you go about writing that story? Was it like, did you tell the stories of individual people and stuff like that?
I mean, that's the way I like to do it, to sort of make it read as, like a story. It's got to be interesting. You've got to have the facts and figures in there. If it's an official history, I've written a history of the Cruising Yacht Club at North Haven and McBride, AJ and PA McBride. So for those company books, there has to be, the record in there, some of the financial stuff and how the company's sort of tracking. But for me, the way to really tell a story and keep people engaged is to have the voices of the individuals who were there at the time, So, interviewing people, they've got the anecdotes and the context to sort of put around things and bring the story to life. So, lots of interviews with people, and not, you don't just want the company CEOs and the sort of the guys in suits who, get wheeled out. You want the people, up at Moomba and, in the Santos case, or the guy who's, going out in the suburbs back in the 1960s, 69, I think it was, when, natural gas came to Adelaide, and they had to go and change all the little appliances on all the gas, all the little jets on all the gas appliances in Adelaide, to change them over to be able to take natural gas versus the old town gas, which has less energy and burns much more at a lower temperature. So, they were, they're the people that you want to, tell the stories of, because they're the things that people go, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm thinking that in my head right now. Like, I didn't even know that was a thing that you had to do.
Yeah, that's right. The gas adjusters.
Was it bigger? Was it smaller? Like, what was the difference?
It had a lot more heat, and so it burnt a lot more with a lot higher energy. The new one.
The new one burns hotter.
Natural gas, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So, but they had to basically vent all the old gas out of the system. So they had these things sort of set up in the street, and, just like a big old Bunsen burner, but, bigger, and letting the gas
all through the streets there was just these huge fires.
Well,
gas fires just gone.
Yeah, but that, and they probably did it at, times of the day when there are not a lot of people out and about early in the morning and stuff. But they
did you find photos of those kind of things?
Yeah.
They look pretty cool.
Yeah, and there was a certain, I think it was Enfield or Prospect was the very first home that, sort of was connected to natural gas, and so that's the place that they got the media there on that morning in 1969, and showed Mrs. whatever her name is, frying eggs or something on the natural gas, and she said, she ended up with eggs that were, like rubber, because she had to keep doing it over and again so that the media could get their shots and stuff. And then, on the 10th anniversary or the 20th anniversary or whatever, they'd go back and
go to the same house.
Mrs. Little, I think she was, and go back there and how are you getting along with your gas?
Was it done in summer?
I want to say it was November, but I mean,
pretty much summer. So it was the summer of '69 that Adelaide got gas.
Yeah, because it was the year that humans first walked on the moon. That was the same year. Mm.
What a year! We did a lot that year.
We did.
Well, last year was pretty good. Did you hear about the fusion? That they've figured out how to have a net positive from doing fusion, nuclear fusion.
No, I'm sorry, that one.
No, that's all right. I found that the other day. I was like, that's wild. Supposedly that is the biggest thing in terms of like modern science related to energy that we've had in a long time.
See, I told you I'm not up with my reading.
That's okay. This is a conversation. You don't need to know everything. I know some things. You know some things.
Yeah.
All right,
it was a very positive, good experience writing the Santos history. I hadn't done a big commissioned project like that before, but the CEO at the time was very genuine in saying, I want it to be warts and all. It's not going to be a PR project. I want, the history of things that, everything that's happened.
What were some of the bloopers or the fumbles that you found out about?
Well, I suppose the biggest one at that time there'd been this partnership with a company in Indonesia, and there was a problem over there with a gas with a well.
Polluted it or something.
Yeah, there was a lot of mud. Banjo it was called, and a lot of mud bubbling up and contaminating a lot of villages. So, I mean, of course, that was disaster for everybody. But they just didn't want anything like that to be glossed over. It still had to be, part of the story, because, it happened, and if you sort of leave things like that out, then people would start to wonder, well, what else are you leaving out? It needed to be a genuine account of that rise and fall, the ups and downs of a company. When you've got 60 years of history, there's going to be some things that are big achievements and everyone celebrates, and other points where people go, that wasn't so great. But they didn't interfere in any way sort of editorially. I wasn't told you have to do this and you have to do that. I was pretty much left to my own devices to tell the story.
That's
as I
awesome.
saw it. Yeah, it was good.
What
Yeah,
a
and the other commissioned works that I've done have been equally as good. I've not had a bad experience where I've kind of, I did have in my contract with the Santos one, because it was the first one I'd done, and I had it in my contract that I could take my name off the book if I wanted to. So if I wasn't happy in the end and I felt that it had been changed or I'd not been able to do things that I thought were right, I would take my name and not be, associated with it. But I didn't have to do anything like that, and it's been equally as positive with the other commissioned works I've done. So
Yeah, cool. What else? Good. Just to stay on Santos for a bit, what other cool things did you find out about that history?
Well, for me, I think one of the outstanding experiences was going to Moomba. And just it's a place where very few people get to go. It's a private.
Where is Moomba?
Well, up north. Up near Inaminka, out in the middle of nowhere, basically. But yeah, it's a private, industrial site, private company, so you can't just drop in there. So yeah, I felt privileged to go there, and I just felt so impressed with what people had built out there, and that nobody really gets to see that and realise that that's where all, our gas supplies are coming from, and that these people were up there in the 60s building this whole infrastructure, and it was pretty new at the time. So I think it was quite impressive to see, and I felt quite honoured to be able to see it.
Yeah, I've been to a few of those large industrial sites, not one like that, but I found that you're just so in awe of the scale of it all, like the fact that just everything is so big.
Yep. And in this case, everything had to be bought in. It's a big effort just to get the stuff there. It's really remote. There's nothing around.
Yeah.
So,
fair enough. And the third book, or the fourth book?
Well, I've written 3 children's books, so I think.
Cool.
So they came a bit later. Yeah. What came after that? Well, the Cruising Yacht Club. Yeah. So that was around the same. Yeah. So that was 2014.
Was a commission as well.
That was commissioned as well. So that was their 40th anniversary in 2013. Because it's their 50th year this year, 2023.
Cool. So I don't know what this yacht club is. Tell me.
Cruising Yacht Club down at North Haven. It's a Cruising Yacht Club of South Australia. So together
the little yachts?
No, the big rate. So they've got 2, at least 3 yachts from there have been in the Sydney to Hobart, and 2 of them have been winners. So Secret Men's Business is a yacht people might have heard about. That was a previous winner, and Too True is the other one that I'm thinking of. Yeah, that's a previous winner of the Sydney to Hobart. Yeah, so they've got big racing yachts down there. They've just had their Port Lincoln race week. That was another sort of story of pioneers, I guess. Malcolm Kinnaird, who's since passed away, but he was the one with the vision to sort of see this swamp area down at North Haven and say, we want to, it was the Royal Yacht Squadron was the sort of the place for yachting back then in the 70s, and he was a young, ambitious guy and said, hey, we should build a new club. We want to get these new type of marinas, and we can rehabilitate this land, and let's build it here. And they did, and so it was another interesting story of sort of having the determination and enthusiasm to build something new, and here we are 50 years later, and it's part of the landscape down there.
Yeah, cool. And what are the biggest things that you found that these guys had to go through to like persevere with these huge undertakings?
With the yacht club, or just
I mean, obviously in general, like what are the kind of, but let's use the yacht club as an example, but surely they would have, like, that's not an easy thing to do.
No, well, and I suppose if I think about Tom Cruise and Reg Sprigg, and then the most recent book I've written about a girl, which tells the story of Alison Brown, who went up to the remote northwest of WA, and
can you just turn the buzzing off? Yeah, can you just turn the buzzing off though? It's over there. Do you want to put on airplane mode or something?
Yeah, so it's the only woman I've written about really, but still with the same mindset that she was willing as a 19-year-old to go and set up life, move and live, in this remote area, 200 kilometres north of Broome, in a very isolated, primitive part of the world. So, and I think, Tom and Reg and, Mark and Kinnaird I mentioned, they're all, people are like, well, might be hard, but I'm going to give it a shot. They're just adventurous, determined, enthusiastic, and not sort of, and humble, That's, I think, with Tom, like people would say, oh, you're, such a hard job. And he'd say, but yeah, lots of people were doing hard jobs back in the 1930s, 1940s. Some people were going off to fight in the war, so he didn't think he was doing anything that difficult. But other people would look at driving every fortnight from Murray to Birdsville and back. Some of those trips took 6 weeks when he got flooded or bogged or whatever, and, they'd say, I'm not doing that, whereas some of these people, Alison living up there, the only European woman around, having to deal with snakes and living in a little hut made literally from paper bark. Right. So, and they lived in that for 7 years, her and her husband. So, they're just people that sort of get on with life and just don't sit around and complain, but actually just, well, it might be hard, but we're going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, so what if it's hard?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. That sounds like the epitome of hard yakka.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it's inspiring to be around those kind of people. And I'm lucky that I've been able to tell the stories of so many of them.
Has that inspired you to do, like, I mean, obviously writing these books would be pretty hard. I'd think it'd be pretty easy to get demotivated while writing a book.
No, I mean, yeah, I suppose I'm happy working at home by myself. When COVID came and people had to go home, some people found it really difficult sort of being isolated and just stuck in their own little, study. Whereas for me, it's like, that's just the usual. I'm very happy and working, on my own, and I'm disciplined, I guess, and will get the work done. Some people find it hard to sort of knuckle down and get too distracted, but that has not been a problem for me. And
do you find that you have like good like habits or rituals that you just go back to start your morning to like get you going? Or
for me, yeah, I mean, for me, I treat it as a job, so I find it hard to, and I guess writing fiction's different, but, like people I feel some people are precious about it, like, oh, I'm not inspired today, or I'm not motivated, I need to, do something different because, the muse has not visited me, at the moment. And for me, it's like, it's my job, so I get up and I go to my study and I work, so.
And the story's there.
Yeah.
You just need to extract it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But I think, and the book that I've found, like, people sometimes ask for recommendations for writing books or whatever. The one that speaks to me, I don't read a lot of writing books, but Stephen King on writing. And, that's sort of how he, treats it. It's like, it's your job. There's a lot, you've got all these words, you've got to sit there and put them in a line. It's just a job like everybody else. You can't sort of just, say, well, I'm not inspired today, I'll do something else, or I can only write, 1 hour today or something. I would, especially, like if you're being paid a commission, it is your job.
Yeah, definitely. And how did you get into doing children's books?
The Tom Cruise story, yeah. So I have to give credit to, there was a book called The Peasant Prince, which was a children's adaptation of Mao's Last Dancer, the book about Mao Shun-sin, I think his name, how you pronounce his surname.
Well, that's not Chairman Mao, is it?
No, not Chairman Mao. It is referring to Chairman Mao, but it's a dancer, male ballet dancer who defected from China and was in the States for a long time and then came to Australia. So it was his sort of autobiography. And then he wrote a children's book sort of version of that, which was a beautiful book. And then not around the same time, Banjo's book, The Happiest Refugee, came out. That's his story of his sort of life coming as a refugee, a boat person from Vietnam, and then coming to Australia. The comedian Banjo. Anyway, he wrote a children's book as well. So I guess that those were sort of in my mind, and I came up and just thought one time I'm gonna I started writing this story about Tom Cruise, and sort of, I guess, adapting my Mailman book into a book for children. So that's what I did. Yeah, so that was my first children's book, yeah.
And how did you find going about, like, writing for kids? Like, was it, because obviously your other works would have been a lot more probably dense in comparison.
It's a matter of distilling it, down, like the Mailman's about 300 pages, whereas the children's book you've got about 500 words to work with. So,
and did you make it rhyme like Dr. Zeus?
No, not a rhyming one, but basically telling the story of Tom's delivering stuff up the track, and then the floods come, and everybody's waiting for their stuff. So Tom's got to figure it out, and he gets a boat, which he did, and then he could bring everything across, and everybody gets all their goods at the end, including the Birdsville Hotel that had run out of beer. So that's the end of the story. Yeah. So it was just, I guess, distilling it right down to the crucial element, which is he was the lifeline for people up the Birdsville track, which was true. Everybody waited for Tom to come.
Yeah, cool. I feel like that's a cool study of just like, because being that most of your books are about like men's journeys, and I feel like as a culture we're in this interesting place where people are forgetting or like re-examining the relationship between men and women, and you've spent a fair bit of your time like examining these men going about their duty in life, whether it be because they choose it as their career or whether they're just drawn to it independently and they're not just a cog in a wheel doing it, but they're like more on their own accord, like Sprig. So what do you think that it like really means to be a man?
To be a man?
Yeah, like looking at all these men that have gone about these journeys, like what do you think?
Yeah, but I think a lot of, it was the era where men went out and did the interesting stuff and the women stayed at home. So I think it's not so much a function of the man saying, I'm going to, the man's more interesting. The men back in the 30s and 40s, excuse me, just had the more opportunity to do the interesting stuff. There was Mrs. Birdseye over on the West Coast, she was running a mail service or something. There were women running hotels, they were Mrs. Pierpont, I think, up at Copley was running the pubs, so there were women doing things, but a lot of them, they just didn't have the chance. There's probably more women that wanted to do stuff that didn't have the opportunity. So I've written my first book now about a woman, and I'm sure going forward there'll be more stories because now women have more opportunity to go out and do the interesting stuff, so I think there'll be more female stories coming.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. And what are the other children's books that you did?
More men. Banjo Paterson. So the publisher Random House had a whole series of books about significant Australians, and so they asked me if I would like to write one for them and on Banjo Paterson. So that was where they asked if I would do that, and I was like, yeah, that'd be great. So basically it's the story of Banjo Paterson for children.
Banjo Paterson's a poet.
Banjo Paterson's the poet. When I go and talk to kids in schools, I say, anybody seen what Banjo Paterson looks like? And they all go, and then you hold up a $10 note and go, here he is on the $10 note. And they go, oh, wow. And, anybody heard Banjo Paterson's poem, one of his poems? And they all go, do you know the song Waltzing Matilda? So, yeah, that way he wrote the words for Waltzing Matilda, and then it was put to music by somebody else. So that was that one. And then the second one, or the third book that I've written about for children is Sidney Kidman, The Cattle King. So that was another, Outback story, Adelaide.
What was the story about the Cattle King?
So he was, left home at age 13, went to the Broken Hill and sort of lived in the Outback and just bought his first cattle station and bought another and built up his wealth until he became, owned all of his cattle stations put together were like as larger than Denmark, I think I say in the book. Gina Reinhardt now owns SK Kidman and Co. So a lot of those sort of iconic Outback cattle stations were Kidman properties. But the sort of, so I talk about, him sort of, it's a rags to riches story, he didn't really he hardly had any schooling. His wife was a former school teacher, and they, after they married and lived up in Kapunda, their home, Aringa, when they moved back to Adelaide, he donated it to the education department, sort of in honour of the role of education, that his wife had sort of helped him improve his reading and that sort of thing. And so that became Kapunda High School. It's actually burnt down, sadly, recently in the last few years. A lot of it's been damaged. But so that, he recognised, so it is a rags to riches story, that he, even though he had little schooling, became this very wealthy. I mean, he was a celebrity back in the 30s. So one part of the book is they had a rodeo to celebrate his 70th birthday here in Adelaide. And they still say it's the biggest birthday party for a private citizen in Australia. So there was about 50,000 people turned up, which is about,
That's huge. That's like a
Phil
stadium,
Adelaide Oval, exactly right. And it was 1/6 of the population of Adelaide at the time.
1/6 of the population. Wow.
So I put on this free rodeo and brought down, horses and his employees that worked on the station, musterers and drovers and jackaroos, and they came down with all these wild animals and put on this rodeo. And, of course, 50,000 people crowded in, and the animals got freaked out, and so there was, tearaway bulls and, it turned into complete chaos. And so there was a lot of injuries. People had been climbing on roofs and trees to get a good vantage point to see, and then, one person fell through the roof and got burnt by electric wires. There were broken bones.
Chaos.
Yeah, a baby got thrown 5 metres out of its mother's arms.
No way.
Yeah, it was all in newspaper reports. So that's that's in the book. So no one was killed, but lots of people were carted off to hospital.
Close.
Yeah, and Sidney Kidman said, "Oh no, we're not doing that again." Yeah, he made a big donation to the ambulance service. He was quite embarrassed about how it had all got out of hand.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah. Yeah, so pretty exciting times.
Yeah, definitely. I remember watching the movie about the greatest race, the one that Andy Thomas, he narrated it, and it was SBS one, and it was about the first plane, like long distance flight from
Sir Ross
London
and Sir
to
Keith Smith.
Yeah, from London to Adelaide, and how they did that journey.
We know Ross and Keith. On my mother's doorstep, there we have 2 stumps of wood, about, big tree stumps. One's painted Sir Ross and the other one's painted Sir Keith. So my dad, being a fan of Ross and Keith Smith, when he was restoring the Badger, back to Tom Cruise's Badger, he managed to find some land that belonged to the Department of Agriculture up at Northfield. And they got it for a peppercorn rent. And for the 4 years that they were working on the truck, they had this big open space that they could use. It's now all built over. It's the suburb of Oakden. So fortunately for them, it was all available pretty much free when they needed it. But it's pretty much the site where Sir Ross and Sir Keith Smith landed their plane in Adelaide at the completion of that great race. So that's why Dad needed some, like stumps to rest the tow bars on or whatever you're doing when you're restoring a truck, and he painted them and named them Sir Ross and Sir Keith. So we've still got them sitting at home.
Yeah, beauty. I love those little small homages.
Yeah.
They're nice.
Yeah,
Have you created any of those throughout, or collected any of those throughout all these journeys of going through people's lives?
I've always got little, bits and pieces, like, I've got pearl shell now that I've, collected from Cygnet Bay, so that I can, when I do talks, I can show people that, this is the oyster. I'm wearing the pearls. This is a strand of pearls from Cygnet Bay. This is the shell that they come from that's, is bigger than your hand. When I wrote
What's this story?
This is the one about about a girl, about Alison Brown, who went up north of Broome and lived there back in the...
What's the pearls got to do with it?
Well, so they started a pearl farm.
Ah.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
So, they started growing pearls back got the lease and sort of started the business back in the 60s, and, had to persevere for 20 years really before they started producing, sufficient number of pearls to really make it viable. So it's growing pearls, a commercial operation.
They're all grown underwater, or how do they grow pearls?
He James Brown, so I wrote the story about Alison. Their son James is now the managing the company as they are sort of transitioning into retirement, I guess. And a couple of years ago, he was Australian Farmer of the Year. They give out Farmer of the Year every year to usually it's somebody who's, on the land, wheat, wool, grain or whatever. So the first time a pearl farmer was awarded Farmer of the Year. So
how does pearl farming even work?
So basically they go and collect wild pearl shells, so the big oysters, like I said, they're bigger than your hand, and they bring them back to the farm, and then they insert a little bit of pearl, like a sphere of pearl shell basically, into the oyster. So they have to do a little operation and open it up, put the shell in, and then it sits there. They put it back in the water, and it's there for about 2 years. They have to sort of
And is this in the ocean?
In the ocean, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, okay.
So just all as you see on the surface is just a line of buoys, so where all the shells are, in baskets, or they're in sort of net envelopes.
Oh, so is this similar to what you'd see at like Port Lincoln with their oyster farms, or?
Yeah, I don't know exactly how they do it at Port Lincoln, but yeah, they're sort of like in a net, envelope sort of thing. So the shell will be sitting in there like that, and they have to go out once a month and clean all the weed and everything off to make sure that the sunlight and water can get through, and that the oysters are growing optimally. But it takes about 2 years to grow a pearl, and then they'll bring them up and, open them. Hopefully there's a pearl in there, a nice spherical pearl. Sometimes the oyster will reject that little nucleus that they've put in there, and but it might, in doing so, create a little, irritation, and it will grow a pearl anyway. And they're unusual, sort of odd-shaped ones. They won't be completely round, and they're called keshi pearls. But they're, also valuable and beautiful. And you get, some that are slightly different, apricot-y, pinky kind of colours. But traditionally, the Australian South Sea pearl are the white ones. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah.
There you go. And so how many, do you expect when you're doing pearl farming for it to work? Like, is it like an 80-20? Like you'd have 20% of them that just doesn't grow the pearl, or?
Yeah, it might be around about that. Say 80% yield, in a good season. Sometimes they get disease. Things have been kind of poor for a few years. They've had some sort of disease that they're still trying to get on top of. But and then what you can do is for those that have grown a nice pearl, you can put another one in, and you'll have a lower production rate, a lower production rate, but you'll get a bigger pearl.
Oh, okay.
So you can do it potentially up to 3 times for some oysters, and each time it'll be slightly bigger because it's sort of already grown a pearl, so it's used to sort of having something a bit larger in there. But yeah, your yield rate decreases.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And you know how the Great Barrier Reef is getting bleached and all that from the acidification of the waters? Has that affected pearl farming as well?
No, not up northern waters. But yeah, as I said, they've had some problem with some sort of, I don't really know if it's climate change, if the temperature, the water temperature is increasing slightly. There has been something affecting production in the last few years, but they don't have the bleaching that has been going on the Barrier Reef, but the environment that they're in, that just shows that they rely on pristine water. And up there in Cygnet Bay and that sort of northern area, they have these huge tidal movements that bring a lot of nutrients in and out, and that's sort of why they thrive up there. But the Cygnet Bay pearl people also have a farm on the east coast at Broken Bay near the Hawkesbury River. So they produce the smaller pearls, look more like the ones that the Queen used to wear, and strands around her neck, more the size of an oyster, an eating oyster. So completely different species of oyster. But then they've had floods in the Hawkesbury as well, so it's not without. It's not an easy business to be in, but a beautiful product that they grow.
Yeah, definitely sounds it. And how did you get involved in that one?
Actually my mum's, Alison, who I wrote about, her husband Bruce is my mum's cousin. So there's a family connection there, and Alison wanted to write her story and came to me for some help, basically, yeah.
Yeah, beauty.
Yeah.
And that's your most recent book?
Yes. Yeah, that came out in November, just in November.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Where do you sell your books now that the market's changed?
Yeah, so that one, basically you need to, it is in the local bookstores, but you can get it on the website from Pearls of Australia or Cygnet Bay Pearls, and my website, but I haven't updated it very much. But yeah, other books are in, Booktopia is an online bookstore. I mean, they are still in the bookstores, but, a lot of books that nowadays are sold at the big discount, department stores. It's not an easy business to be in, book selling, but there's some good independent bookstores still around. The Shakespeare's up in the hills, and Matilda, Shakespeare's at Blackwood, Matilda's up in the hills, Dylan's, there's the Dimmicks. We're still lucky that we've got some good bookstores around.
Have you adopted Amazon?
No.
Gone on any of that? Is that like an act of protest, or it just doesn't make financial sense?
It's just not a. I suppose my books are so Australian, and it's just not something I've explored.
Yeah, okay.
No.
Have you done any audiobooks?
Yeah. So Mailman is on CD and ebooks. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, audiobooks and ebooks. Yeah. So some of them are ebooks and some of them are audiobooks. Like there's, back in the older days when Mailman came out, they came out on CDs and cassettes even for they're still produced for visually impaired people. Because the way it was explained to me was, and I don't know how the technology is now, but CDs are not as easy to use as cassette tapes, where you can basically stop it, and then if you want to listen to it again later, you just press start. Whereas with a CD, it's not as easy. But I don't know. It's probably all different technology now. But
yeah, I don't know. I don't really use CDs or cassettes anymore.
No, it's all changed.
I stream it all. I normally use Audible and then listen to audiobooks that way.
Yeah.
And then as I'm driving around or something, I'll just be listening like I'd be listening to a podcast or music.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure that any, maybe Mailman, but I haven't kept up with all that.
Yeah, beautiful. And what's the next book you're working on? Have you figured that
out? No, I haven't figured that out yet. I'm just living in a little space of time. Sometimes, oftentimes projects come to me. So meanwhile, I'm just carrying on doing other stuff.
Yeah, beauty.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. It's been fun to catch up, and you've stretched my mind back to some long ago times and projects. So it's been interesting. Thanks.
It's good to do it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Cheers, guys.